Hello BookTube and welcome to Double Tag Thursday. For the two tags I'm going to be doing today, I'm going to be doing two variations on the in or out tag. The first tag, this video, will be the Rick MacDonnell original, which I will title the MacDonnell original as a sort of in a parentheses. And then the second one, which I will film after this one, will be the Donahue edition. So there are quite a few questions with the MacDonnell original, so let's get started. Prompt number 1. Reading the last page first. I'm out. I don't actually understand this at all. 2. Enemies to lovers. I'm in, with caveats. I think the gradual progression of a protagonist and an antagonist who are attracted to each other and who gradually become a romantic item, I think it's interesting, and you can do quite a lot with. Particularly, one of the greatest romances in fiction is Batman and Catwoman, and they've been enemies for decades. Although Catwoman has, and most of Batman's female villains have also been his love interests, except for, I think, Harley Quinn. I don't think they've had a romantic spark before, but I'm quite in. Although there are, I think, points where if the antagonist is particularly reprehensible, I think it is rather hard in those cases to make an argument for enemies to lovers. But I think if done well, I'm quite in on enemies to lovers. Dream sequences. I'm rather out on dream sequences. I think they can be done well if in like a small portion. But if it's going to be something like, say, Bobby Ewing in Dallas, where an entire season of the American primetime soap Dallas was a dream sequence, no, I'm out on that. Love triangles. We're at number 4. I'm sorry if I've missed some of the numbers. If done well, I think it could be quite interesting, but yeah. 5, cracked spines. I'm out. Personally, I don't crack the spines. I'm rather careful with my books. But I do bring into my collection books that have been a bit more brutalized by their previous owners. And I'm usually not all that particular about the quality of the book, although sometimes it can get annoying. And I will go on around when I do my September book haul, because quite a few of my incoming Fullmetal Alchemist volumes were rather not quite brutalized, but were ex-library copies, so they're going to be a bit rough, I think. Number 6, Back to My Small Town. I'm rather out on those. They can be done well, but I think as a concept, I'm not terribly fond of them. Number 7, Monsters or Regular People. I'm out on that because monsters are monsters, and should be treated as monsters and not tried to be made human or whatnot, depending what kind of monsters we're talking about here. No paragraph breaks for number 8. I think I'm out on that. 9, multi-generational sagas. I'm in with. They can be quite well done, I think. I quite enjoyed Pachinko, although I thought the later generations didn't get quite the attention that the earlier generations did, so which is always a danger. 10, rereading. I'm in on. I reread rather frequently, although sometimes I am far more critical in the rereading than I am my initial reads. 11, artificial intelligence. I'm in. It's not my favorite sci-fi concept, but if done well, I think it's quite interesting. 12, drop caps. I'm in on, although something that I don't necessarily think all that much about. 13, happy endings. I quite like happy endings. I'm in on that. 14, plot points that only converge at the end. I'm torn. I mean, on the one hand, obviously, if all the plot threads only come together at the end, it's a little bit artificial. But at the same time, this is fiction we're talking about here, and, well, it is artificial. So, it should be a bit... there should be an acceptance of artificiality in fiction writing and in fiction storytelling. But I think I kind of like plot points that kind of sometimes intersect before the ending or before the climax. I think can also be affecting. 15, detailed magic systems. So I'm rather out on this. I much prefer, and I think Steve mentioned it in his video, the author pretty much knowing how the magic system works. But that doesn't necessarily mean the reader needs to know every detail, because if the magic system is so highly codified, so highly sort of structured, it comes off as being quite artificial. And while, yes, particularly in fantasy fiction, there are a lot of elements that do come off as being far more artificial than they did in reality, it's still, I think it looks more like you're playing a sort of a Dungeons and Dragons style game than you are telling a story. 16, classic fantasy races. I'm in on whether they be the Tolkien group or even from mythology. 17, unreliable narrators. I'm in on. I quite like them, if done well. 18, evil protagonists. Now, I'm rather in on these. Because I think sometimes a protagonist doesn't necessarily always have to be a hero, nor should they be. Particularly when you're talking, now of course when we're talking about literary fiction or realistic fiction, obviously the protagonist will be a normal person. And a normal person is usually more good than evil, but there's a balance. Scales can go one way or the other. When we're talking about genre fiction, usually the protagonist is more morally upstanding. But sometimes a villain as a protagonist, well, in which case it would be an evil hero, can also be quite interesting. Particularly like Death Note. Light Yagami, the protagonist of Death Note, he is rather a despicable villain. Although that said, there are times when you have so-called villain protagonists where it turns out that they're not so bad and the so-called heroes are considerably worse. That bugs me to no end. I read a novel a few years ago. I think it's called... What is it called? Almost Infamous by... I'll leave a link to the author, or mention the author's name maybe in the show notes if I remember. I think it's Max Carter. That talks about a young man who gains superpowers and who accidentally kills a superhero and is then recruited to become a villain. And the thing is that these young villains are being recruited for what is essentially a reality television show for the benefit of the superheroes, who are revealed to be rather significantly worse. And I think that's also true of, while the main character in Hero by Perry Moore isn't a villain, he's a young hero. But I think at the end of that book too, sorry for the spoiler, I think the main hero actually turns out to be the villain, I think. But anyway, where were we at here? 19, The Chosen One. I think I've done well. The Chosen One can be interesting, but I usually tend to prefer, I think, the hero choosing to be the hero rather than destiny or the character being forced to, because usually there's a period where the hero doesn't want to, and that part can get tiresome incredibly quickly, especially for me. 20. When the Protagonist Dies. I think this can be very well done, although it depends what you define by protagonist. I mean, A Song of Ice and Fire, the novel or the series really begins with the execution of Ned Stark. I think there was another one. Kelcade's, I'm blanking on the title of it. Fate of the Fallen. Really begins with the death of the Chosen One hero, and it sees his best friend having to pick up the slack. Although I'm not entirely sure how that ends, because I didn't particularly like that one. But anyway. 21. Really long chapters. I'm rather out on them. They can be draining and exhausting. Although some really long chapters, particularly in nonfiction, tend to break up the chapters into subchapters or sections, which are nice, but I really rather prefer shorter chapters, particularly in fiction. Excuse me. 22. French Flaps. I'm okay with them. 23. Deckled Edges. I despise them. I do not understand the attraction of Deckled Edges. They are just annoying to me. 24. Signed copies by the author. I'm out on. I don't particularly care if I have books signed by an author, but if you like your book signed by an author, I don't care. You do you. Dog earring pages for 25. I am out, because that's what these are for. They're called bookmarks. Use them. 26. Chapter titles instead of numbers. I'm in on. I quite like individual chapters being titled or having their own titles rather than just a number. So that was the Interrupt tag, the Rick MacDonnell original. So I will be right back with the Donahue edition. So until then, BookTube, thank you, have a great afternoon, and stay safe.